So bonjour, goedemiddag, hello, good afternoon. My name is John Bell, and I have the very ambitiously titled job of Director of the Healthy Planet Directorate in Research and Innovation. And you can maybe tell me in the course of this afternoon, how do we measure success there? And I'm here working with colleagues from the Commission's Department in Research and Innovation, other departments in Environment, and that to talk with you and have a conversation about reversing biodiversity decline. The session is called Beyond 2020. And part of its raison d'etre is to situate this very critical discussion in the context of Horizon Europe, and especially what is called Cluster 6 of Horizon Europe, that part of Horizon Europe that deals with natural resources and the environment, and it has 7 intervention areas. Now, I think one of the things about these conversations we're starting is, how do we get the Horizon Europe programme to start having an impact at a critical and defining time for our planet, our society, and our economy? You will have seen the report of the IPCC on the oceans, which is probably the most important document written on the oceans since the first maps, in terms of situating us in terms of life on Earth. And increasingly, people are going to be turning to people like us to talk about what is it that research and innovation can do to accelerate and test and demonstrate solutions as we move to transition to this more sustainable way of living and of reconnecting with nature. The context that we're in is probably the most promising that we've had, despite all of the bad news that we're reading, in that we have a new Commission President whose number one priority is to set a new mission for the European Union, and that is that we would become sustainable by 2030 and climate neutral by 2050, mobilizing all of the, I call them the European Union is not a superpower, but it does have superpowers. It has the superpowers of science, participation, diversity, regions, and it also has regulatory and market signals to devise a way forward. So I think you will see, if this Commission is confirmed by the Parliament in the next couple of weeks, very soon in the middle of November, there will be a very ambitious document setting out what that vision should be, with 100 days as a target for the Commission and the institutions to respond with a plan to begin this transition. And I can tell you from the work we've been doing at high level inside the Commission, for the first time in my working life in the Commission, biodiversity is at the political level being taken seriously as one of the central axes for change and transition, as part of a more ambitious approach to how environment needs to be more a part of our political DNA, and how biodiversity now needs to move from niche to norm. So the framing of what we're doing is, I think, very promising. The difference, I don't know if you were looking at Greta Thunberg the other day. I was watching her with my kids, and the point where she turns and says, you know, how dare you? This is also, this is not simply a response. This is a challenge to the research innovation world. Our job is to dare together to rethink the answer to the problems that have been set by the way in which we've organized our economy and our society, and how it's impacting on life itself on Earth. So no pressure. You don't have to come up with all the solutions this afternoon. You have a very distinguished panel, but this is the beginning, not the end, of a process of discussion and of input. And in this and in the mission discussions and the discussions about the strategic plan on Horizon Europe, if you have particularly helpful ideas, please feel free to continue to contribute that in the way that has been set out on our website. And as far as I understand, we have until the 4th of October to continue making these contributions to this draft of what is called the strategic plan. And the strategic plan is kind of the big ticket thinking about where we want to go, and what are the issues that are important for research and innovation at European Union level in what's called the Horizon Europe programme. And then we will sit down with the member states and others and work out what instruments we need to do that. We need at this point, because we're facing a total contextual change for our way of life, we need to think in a completely open way. So the founder of the European Union, one of the founders, Jean Monnet, said when you face an insuperable barrier, you need to change the context. And that's what we need to do, and we need to do it quickly. So part of this conversation is to think about how can research and innovation accelerate the solutions, address more quickly the drivers of destruction and extinction, and maybe identify the positive ways in which we can actually bring together the three aspects of sustainability. The world where people need to work and live in the countryside and the cities, the world in which we have a society which is feeling at ease with itself and moving in the right directions and not divided between those who can afford biodiversity and sustainability and those who cannot, and then our obligation to the planet. Of course, if we don't pay attention to the planet will be fine. It will just mean that our species doesn't have a great future. And I think the difference, as we say in the European Union, between optimism and hope is having a plan. So this is part of putting that plan together, and we're in listening mode. The biodiversity, what's called the intervention area in our language in the Commission, Horizon Europe, talks about four main areas: biodiversity, ecosystem services, where there's a huge need and opportunity for Europe, natural capital. Natural capital, it's very interesting in all the different meetings I've been in for the last few days, the question of what is economic growth in this new context? How do we measure and value what is productive or non-productive? There are really very significant conversations going on at all levels, and natural capital is a very important part of that. And nature-based solutions. Everybody reaches for nature-based solutions, but one of the things we were talking to Xavier just beforehand, we need to start showing people the examples and think about the demonstrators to show that, in fact, how can nature-based solutions be deployed and scaled up in different parts of Europe and for different parts of society. So we have a very promising context. We have the EU is about to look at its biodiversity strategy again. This will be a very critical moment, and I would hope that when they do, we have something to say about how research and innovation and investment can drive this transition and this change. One of the other things that we have in our organization, one of the great things about research and innovation is it can bring together actions across disciplines, of course, in terms of the sciences. It can bring together actions across policies, and it can actually convene people at slightly more distant point in the future when people can agree on what needs to be done. People will agree on what needs to be done tomorrow, where they may fight tooth and nail on what needs to be done today. And we're working across food, agriculture, fisheries, water, environmental services in different ways, and in particular I want to mention the bioeconomy, where, having listened to colleagues who are concerned about the impact of a decontextualized bioeconomy, we have redrafted the bioeconomy strategy and update, and it has three pillars, one of which is working within planetary boundaries and understanding what the limits of the bioeconomy are. So bit by bit we're developing an integrated approach to policy. And finally, in the policy area, we have to work on global policies in a global way. You know, we have a very strong history. I think the IPCC is the greatest example of working across Europe for science to drive a new understanding of reality and policy. It's probably the exemplar. And I think the work in the IPBS deserves to be supported in the same way. I think our ambition, the ambition of our colleagues here, we met with the executive director of IPBS, we need to put IPBS on the same footing in terms of its authority and the quality of its reports and the certainty of its science as we did with the IPCC some years ago. And I think you can count on me to support you in doing that. Now, there has been a consultation. Somebody's going to show a slide in the background at some point. And what it says is, in terms of targeted impacts, halting biodiversity decline and the restoration of ecosystems gets 73% strong support by all responses. Now, think about that. All parts of Europe, all age groups, all backgrounds, all cultures, and 82% strong support of respondents interested in Cluster 6. I don't know who the other 18% are. I start to worry, but I think the main message to take out of this is there is a very strong support to move forward. So we have this dilemma of how do we have a better integration of environmental concerns, notably biodiversity, in all the clusters. Yeah. Normally I need my daughter to be here to make things work. I'm not a digital native. So how are we going to work on a better integration of environmental concerns, notably biodiversity, in all the clusters? The links between biodiversity and climate change. Well, we said it should be reinforced, but we simply cannot have a series of solutions to one problem that starts creating unintended consequences elsewhere. The question for us here is, how are we going to do this? Everybody can stand up and say, I think we need to solve this problem. I think we need to address that problem. How are we going to do it? Stakeholders involved, including citizens. If there's one issue that we have in all of our societies today, is trust. There's been a breakdown in trust in our political system between science and citizens, between different parts of society and citizens. And a lot of the things that are going to happen will have a fundamental impact on very often the most vulnerable people in our society, who are the ones feeling outside of the discussion that's taking place about their futures. So on these profound issues, we need to find new ways of mobilizing, engaging people, citizens, stakeholders in testing, demonstrating, and choosing the directions in terms of making a more sustainable way of life possible. Respondents have also asked for a more what they call cross-cutting, joint-up approach in Cluster 6, particularly to look at how research and innovation for enabling transformational change can be emphasized. And place-based innovation, this is underlined notably by the regions, is very important to a lot of people. I think actually displacement is a word that you could use for where most people find themselves in this great period of disruption that we're going through. And if we can work through in a place-based way and bring these nature-based solutions and bring people on board and give the appliance of science and social innovation to show that people can actually design better futures for themselves, this is how I think things can change dramatically across Europe. It won't be from faceless bureaucrats like myself issuing things from pulpits like this. There are major issues of concern in developing a more sustainable agriculture, fisheries, aquaculture and food chains. And here again, there will be a big push in the von der Leyen Commission on a systems approach to the farm-to-fork food system. So what can research and innovation do? We know there are critical control points and leverage points, chemical-based pesticides, nutrient cycles, water cycles. Research and innovation can actually have a joint-up approach to that. And I would also encourage you in inputting into the work of the mission boards that are taking place here, if you have ideas in terms of things that could be tried and tested to make changes here, to do that. So last but not least, I'm to announce the inclusion in the Horizon Europe strategic programme of the future European biodiversity partnership with member states. Now, you're going to have a chance to talk about this in detail when you've been liberated from my intervention. This is an important step because it means that institutionally, the importance of aligning member states' work with the European Union's instruments in the area of biodiversity has been deemed to be one of the most important areas in a very competitive list of areas that is there. So it's a very strong opportunity. We absolutely need to get you mobilized in terms of how can we actually make this have an impact and have the leverage that we need. We will have to align research agendas with the policy and implementation needs with the member states and at regional level. So again, the question is, how best can we do that? Can we use this partnership in a more creative and effective way and to shorten the distance between committee rooms here and the changes that are taking place in such a negative way and so quickly on the ground? Biodiversity, I've mentioned, is part of 4 of the missions. And those of you who don't know the jargon of the missions are, we're creating a new space in our research and innovation program, which is focused on public goods, things that matter to people, problems that people want research and innovation to fix, and allow us then to mobilize, those of us who are part of the research and innovation community, to mobilize the instruments to make them happen. So we have 5 missions, and almost all of them are relevant to the area of biodiversity, whether we're talking about the oceans and the healthy seas, or the future of cities, or climate adaptation, and even the health issues around cancer, but in particular the mission on soils and food. There's a huge opportunity there for you to input into that. These are areas where they're looking for, if a mission is basically a sentence without a comma that I can explain to my mother. So when they were visiting Cape Kennedy in 1961, and one of John F. Kennedy's team were there, he fell over a man in the hall who was mopping the floor with a bucket. And he asked the man, what are you working at? And he said, I'm sending a man to the moon and getting him back. And that's what a mission is about. It's to do something which people can understand is the European Union. The European Union, again, is about doing together maybe things that are slightly improbable that we couldn't do separately, and that will improve our way of life. And so the missions are a very important opportunity. And I encourage you in this early phase, when they're looking for ideas, to contribute actively and to mobilize your constituents and your stakeholders. Now, you're very lucky in that now I'm going to leave, because now I've got to go to another a mission board meeting on climate adaptation, where a lot of the issues that you're going to be talking about will also be hardwired in, and it's an even hotter, darker and clammier room. So I'm doing my best to contribute to global warming by losing a kilo a day at each of these meetings. So I leave you in good hands. Xavier and Anne, my colleagues, we will hear back exactly what you want, but bon voyage, and let's be ambitious and create a sustainable and biodiverse system. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Actually, this session is co-hosted by the DG Research and DG Environment. And we had with us Anne Burrill, who's an advisor on natural capital at DG Environment, who's going also to tell us the other side of environmental research and environmental policy.
Well, I hope it's not really the other side, because certainly our belief, and I think it's a belief of, I hope, everybody in this room, is that policymaking should be science-based. If we're going to do things intelligent to make the world a better place, we ought to really find out what we should do, and we find that out through science, through innovation. It's also what we hear out on the streets. We hear the youth saying that we need to unite behind science. So this is the challenge. How do we make sure that the science that is going to be put forward through the Horizon Europe program really is as useful as possible for addressing societal challenges? Well, we think there are two ways that the science needs to contribute. One is actually giving ideas to us, the faceless bureaucrats and the other policymakers who try to put together some policy responses to the challenges facing it. But science also has a very important role in building up public understanding and raising awareness and making society receptive to the reasons for some of the changes that we need to try to bring about through policy instruments. And certainly science has already signaled to us that we have a big problem in terms of biodiversity. We've got a crisis on our hands. The EBBS report that we're going to hear more about certainly is science-based. It is a scientific document, and it has come up to the public attention, and it has helped the public understand that we really need to do something. I hope that the public is also coming to know that science is also part of the solution. Certainly through this raising of awareness on the issues of biodiversity, there's now a feeling of urgency at the policy level to move, to change something, to make something work better in our society so that we can stop the extinction, so that we can ensure that our biodiversity is there to provide the services and functions that we as human society want, as well as preserving it for its own intrinsic good. Last week or earlier this week at the Climate Summit in the US, we heard an awful lot about the intrinsic link between biodiversity and climate change. We certainly believe that this is true. There's a huge link between the two issues. And when we're thinking about the biodiversity crisis, it goes hand in hand with the climate crisis. We've seen that we can't address the climate crisis without taking into account also biodiversity issues. In these contexts, this political context, this public citizen awareness context, it is at least very encouraging, as John Bell mentioned, that our new president-elect has put environment up in front of the priorities for the next commission. We've heard that we will be developing a European Green Deal, and that one of these elements of the European Green Deal will be a biodiversity strategy. We see this as an incredibly important opportunity to get it right, to get the different policies put together into a coherent response. As far as the biodiversity strategy is concerned, of course, we have one now and we know it's not doing too well. So what do we need to do? We need to make a better biodiversity strategy for the future. We need to work with our global partners to try to see how we can set some ambitious targets for the future, for the whole global community. But we also need to see how we in the EU can lead in this process, including leading by example. So next year is going to be the super year for biodiversity. We're going to have a UN summit on nature, and we're going to have the Convention of the Parties of the Convention on Biological Diversity. This is the opportunity where we have to get at the global scale the right response. We're working with our international partners to try to set smart, measurable targets. That needs science input. We need to have a system to make sure that we can monitor commitments that are made by the various stakeholders and countries to see if they're actually making a difference, and if they're not, what we need to do differently to actually address these challenges. Again, that's science. At the EU level, we need to move ahead, and we need to put on the table right now some commitments for action to tackle the drivers of biodiversity loss and to see how we can effectuate a fast transformational change. Again, it should be science-based. We need to do it fast, though, so we're probably going to have to start drawing first on science that already exists, getting it into the policy-making decision process, but then continue advancing the knowledge as we go forward. Challenge is huge. The timing is very tight, but we need to get it right, and that's why we need to continue to rely on the science and research community. Cluster 6 of Horizon Europe is certainly very important in this, but we consider that the whole of Horizon Europe should be developed in a coherent way, that we make sure, as John was saying, that we have a coherent response to our systemic challenges that we have in front of us. So I certainly look forward to hearing everybody's ideas on how we can make this work, because we got to do it.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to open the floor for the public, for the audience. Please, we have prepared a number of questions in Slido because we want to hear from you and we want to co-design these orientations for Horizon Europe together. But first, let me ask you a question. Now that you gave us the policy context, what would be the main priorities for research to build this biodiversity policy?
Okay, well, the first thing I would say is that we need to have coherence across the RTD program. That's where I sort of ended up before, but let me start again there. If we try to look at science research in a piecemeal approach, we're going to end up with science research solutions that only address one part of our problem. So we need to bring the different disciplines together. We need to get a systemic scientific response to these systemic problems. But then being a little more specific, I think there are three things we need. I think we need to develop our understanding of planetary boundaries, in this case particularly biodiversity boundaries, and the consequences of going beyond these boundaries. How our society is dependent on what biodiversity brings to us, the ecosystem services. And this needs to be understood and presented in a way that the citizens, the decision makers, the business leaders, everybody understands why they have a stake in it, why biodiversity is important to them. So raising that basic understanding. Second thing is we need to develop solutions to tackle the drivers of biodiversity loss. This includes pressures in agriculture, in fisheries, in forestry, in transport, in all of the different types of human activities. How can we modify those human activities to reduce the reduce the impact on biodiversity, but in an equitable way that will be acceptable by society? And when I'm talking about innovative ways of doing things, I certainly don't just mean technological innovation. I think a lot of the innovation needs to be governance and societal innovation. And then I think the third important thing, I said that we want to have a way of tracking whether people are living up to their commitments. So we need operational monitoring systems. We've got lots of nice little projects, things based on Copernicus, things based on the ground, that monitor one little part of biodiversity in one little place. We need a more operational system, something where we can really see where hopefully we're making progress, and if we're not making progress, to try to see why and which drivers are affecting it. So those, I think, are the three main things.
Thank you very much. We try to make sure that we build Horizon Europe to fulfill these expectations from the policy side. Now I would like to show the first results of the poll. You have been answering the questions that we ask you. These polls will be still open for half an hour after the session, so you can still answer, especially the free text forms, because we want to know from you. So this is about the Horizon Europe's orientations. This is a co-design, and we are focused on the intervention area called biodiversity and natural capital. And the first thing I want to know is how many of you have read about it, and if you have, how do you agree with the main lines? So first of all, are we going to the right way? And I see that there are not a lot of answers yet. I can ask already our speakers if you think, for the time being, these orientations go in the right way. Go ahead.
Well, according to what has been said, I think a good thing is that to have a cluster 6, for instance, fully recognizing the importance of biodiversity, proposing tools like partnership to really tackle this in a coherent and strategic manner, and at the same time being sure that biodiversity will be present in the other clusters. I think it's the right thing to do. We avoid two things. The first risk would be to have biodiversity a bit everywhere and at the end nowhere, that is in a fragmented manner, or to avoid a silo, to have biodiversity tackled only at one place. So what we aim at, I think, through this text, it's really to have both approaches, a place where there will be this strategic vision, what should be needed, and something should be done in cluster 6 by different bodies. Other activities should be developed in other clusters or between clusters. And I think this is a key if we want to tackle the issues raised by Anne.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It seems that the audience is a bit shared between I don't know enough and broadly I can see there is an agreement, but still things can be changed. The second question was about how biodiversity is mainstreamed in the rest of the program. That is what you just were mentioned. It's not only about the cluster 6 with food, with agriculture, or with the intervention area, but I want to know. Actually, this should be open for answers. I want to know if you, or even later, if you believe that biodiversity is adequately mainstreamed. What do you think? Have you seen the orientations?
I'm happy to see. Is my microphone
Yes.
on? Yeah. So I'm happy to see that biodiversity is being mainstreamed, and I'm happy with the special attention for biodiversity in the drafts. So I think we're heading in the right direction. The question is how it gets attention. So I'm going to talk about the underlying causes of biodiversity loss in a minute. You know, will the program, and of course we'll have to wait until the final drafts or the final plans, but will the Horizon Europe allow us to better understand and address the underlying causes of biodiversity loss? That's the main question, and the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So let's see.
I mean, I think this is a very important question, as if I've already mentioned it. But I think as people are responding to the consultation, since you still have time to go back and put in comments, it would be really important to look at this to make sure that you're not only looking at cluster, even if you're a biodiversity expert, that you're not only looking at cluster 6, but that you look at the other chapters and maybe identify areas where better bridges could be made.
Yes, and possibly partnering with other consortia that are in areas that you wouldn't consider now, because they need you as you need other areas like social scientists, for example. I would like to see the third one, which is more on the policy side, and is about is the EU working correctly on how to address the drivers of biodiversity loss? I thought you could answer all the questions, and now I see that there's only open for voting one at a time. I don't know if technically this is possible. That's different between optimism and hope. I think I was in the optimistic side. So, but I can open the floor for one or two people who want to elaborate on that. Yes?
I'd just like to pick up the issue of subsidiarity and spatial planning.
Yeah. Throw it.
Hi. It's Tom Wilde from University of Sheffield in England. The issue of spatial planning and biodiversity loss, traditionally the EC has been reluctant to go into the area of urban and spatial planning because of the problems of subsidiarity. In other words, it's the member state's responsibility. Sorry, it doesn't work great.
Yes,
Is this an area, I understand there's some progress in becoming more involved in spatial planning regulations, and is that something you can comment on, please?
Spatial planning.
You want another?
Yeah.
No, okay. No, I mean, you're certainly right that it's been an area. I wouldn't say that the Commission has been reluctant, but yes, the EU as a whole has been, precisely because of the subsidiarity question and that spatial planning is a member state competence. But I think we're in a political climate where there's a general recognition that we need to do some things differently. We need to have some really systemic approaches to dealing with our problems. And certainly land use is both part of the problem and it is an avenue for having solutions. So I think it's something we need to think about more. Now, what the Council will say in the future is very hard for me to say, but I think we have to be open to looking at all sorts of different solutions. And it doesn't mean that we necessarily need to have a regulation or binding rules at the EU level, but finding a mechanism where member states are willing to commit somehow to addressing the problems of land use change and spatial planning. So,
is there any other question or comment from the audience? I think that the response is rather negative. Oh, some okay, but so we still have room for improvement, and this is why we need research.
No, and I mean we're here in a research context,
yes.
But certainly from the side of the policymakers, we have a huge challenge ahead of us now. We need to try to design a response, and we're certainly looking to every and all good idea on how to move forward. And it's good to identify gaps, but even better to identify a solution that is workable societally, politically, and that can actually get over whatever that gap is.
Thank you. If there is no further question, I would like to present our next speaker, Ingrid Visseren, who has written a chapter of the IPBES Global Assessment Report, which is something already. And she's going to explain to us the global context.
Yeah, so I didn't write a chapter. I coordinated a chapter. Of course, the chapter was written with around 20 colleagues. I could have never done it alone. But happy to be here. I have a huge challenge today is to talk you through the IPBES Global Assessment in 5 minutes, which is impossible, but I'll do it anyway. And before I start really going through the assessment itself and its main messages, I have to explain to you the conceptual framework that we use in the global assessment, but also in IPBES more broadly. So if you start at the top, the good quality of life is basically how we define a good or feel about a good quality of life defines everything. Also defines how we organize our societies, our institutions, how we govern our societies, how we design our economic system. So these values of a good quality of life underlie what we call in IPBES the indirect drivers, which of course influence the direct drivers, the stuff that happens on the ground and in the water. So that's deforestation, overfishing, climate change, pollution. The direct drivers that influence the state of nature and influence again how and the extent to which nature can provide benefits or contributions or services to humanity, which of course again influences our good quality of life. So it's the circle of life in short, if you will. And we assess not only the state of nature, but we assess the state of nature's contributions or its ability to provide contributions to people. We assessed trends in terms of institutions and governance aspect, trends in terms of direct drivers. So we basically assessed the whole framework. So if I have to summarize the main message of the assessment in a non-academic way, I would say that the sheer fabric of life is deteriorating fast worldwide. Virtually all indicators, and I'll show you some of the graphs from the summary for policymakers, virtually all indicators are going in the wrong direction. So the fabric is getting smaller and the fabric is falling apart. There's holes getting in the fabric. So we've changed the vast majority of all types of ecosystems worldwide. And one of the main headlines from the report that made it into the global headlines, of course, that more species are threatened with extinction today. 1 million species is our indication are threatened with extinction today than ever before in the history of man. We also looked at trends in terms of nature's contributions to people, and you see that we're choosing, as a global society, we're choosing to use the more material benefits from nature to the detriment of the more regulating services of nature. And all this is, of course, because of the trends, not only the direct trend, the direct drivers that are driving these trends, but also the underlying indirect drivers, and also the values and our way of defining a good quality of life that are underlying the indirect drivers. Because of all of these trends, we're not on our way to meet the ACHI targets by the deadline of the end of next year, and we're not on track to achieve the SDGs. We analyzed mainly the SDGs that have the most direct link with biodiversity. So we're doing something significantly wrong in our environmental policy. We have over 50 years of experience in international environmental policy, and the trends are continuing to head in the wrong direction. So one of the main conclusions of the report is that we need to move our environmental policy to the heart of our societies. So we need to address the indirect drivers of biodiversity loss, the underlying causes, the societal causes of biodiversity loss. So we've developed a definition based on the literature of transformative change, which is a fundamental system-wide reorganization across technological, economic, and social factors, including in terms of paradigms, goals, and values. And again, those are in best terms the indirect drivers that we need to focus our attention on. So one of the main conclusions also in terms of economic aspects is that we need to reconsider our current paradigm of economic growth and really think about how we can reorganize our economic system in order for our societies, for sustainability to become the norm in our societies instead of the exception as it is today. We also thought about how to enable transformative change and how to do it most efficiently. And all of these figures are in the summary for policymakers if you want to look at the details. So we say that if you focus your attention on the levers and leverage points, and you design a governance process that is a learning process, that's the loop, and we look at and we take on board the lessons of the whole governance literature, the political science literature to date. So we need to design these governance processes to be integrative. So that means cross-sectoral, like we've talked about all session. Integrative, adaptive, that's learning while doing. Informed, using all types of knowledge, not only scientific, but also indigenous knowledge or societal knowledge. And inclusive, it needs to be participatory and equitable. If we take on board all of the lessons of the governance literature so far and design the way that takes on board these lessons, then we can really make huge progress. So that's the economic system message. So we have a huge task ahead of us, like the previous speakers have said as well. We've never transformed our society towards sustainability before as a humankind. We've got the other way around. We've got that down pat. We know how to reconfigure society in an unsustainable direction, but we're doing this for the first time to together try and reconfigure the sheer essence of our society in a sustainable manner. So we really need a concerted effort, natural scientists, social scientists, insights from the humanities, policymakers, all kinds of stakeholders, companies, community groups. We all need to step on this train and do it. Thank you.
I have a question for you.
Yes. Can I sit down?
Yes. Well, the question that I had you partially answered, and is about these policy mixes, but we are going to talk to policy later on. Actually, the question is about the prerequisites for this transformational change. Has IPBES, the global assessment, analyzed these prerequisites? What is needed to tackle this transformational change?
Yeah, I think it's kind of hidden in this graph in terms of inclusive governance. So if we are not able to design, and John briefly mentioned it as well, if we're not able to design the transformation so that the costs of the transformation do not end up with the weakest people in society, and that could be people within Europe, but it could also be in the balance between developed and developing countries. If we're not able to design the transformation in an equitable manner, so the costs of the transformation the bill should be sent to the folks that have made a lot of profit off of the unsustainable economy. And if we fail to do that, then there will not be a societal, systemic transformation towards sustainability, because not all of society will be on board. So that's a really important question, and of course the $1 million question is how to do that.
The $1 trillion question.
Yes, yeah.
Because you are aiming to change the whole society and the whole economy. Isn't this too radical, the conclusions from IPBES? And I want to ask this question to the audience and to all the speakers.
No. No, it's not too it's very realistic. It's based on an analysis of trends of what we've been doing for the past 50 years and the impact of our environmental policy of the past 50 years. So we've been doing our environmental policy incorrectly. So we have to, if we want to move towards a sustainable society, we have to look at these indirect drivers. There's no way around it. And the interesting and important point to make is that it's not a bunch of freaky scientists that have come up with these conclusions, but these conclusions are supported by the 132 member states of IPBES. So we've got, I would say, at least the start of a political support for this kind of thinking.
Thank you very much. Any response?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't be so worried about the balance of the people who were involved in developing, and I think it's very good that there were however many hundred freaky scientists behind it, because if it had just been a political discussion, then it'd be a lot easier to just throw it away and say, oh, somebody has some kind of interest behind this, and that's why we're trying to transform society. But no, instead we have a well thought through, documented, scientific analysis of the problem. So I wouldn't be too modest about the scientific input to it, and that is why we're here, because we think we do need a science-based approach. We need to be able to explain why we're doing things, justify them. It's not enough to just have the scientific facts, obviously, but those scientific facts have to provide the basis for mobilizing the citizens, for mobilizing political opinion, and for making it possible to make changes.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe to be
if you don't, we throw you out.
to be provocative, when you say we have to work on the indirect drivers, indeed, what are the indirect drivers, and to what extent they go really deep to the root of our societies? For instance, there is no governance system in this panel. Yes. You look, for instance, for IPBES. You have IPBES and you have IPCC. And when I look at the conclusion of one or the other, sometimes, some conclusions, my feeling is that, I don't know, IPCC will deliver some conclusions, as an ecologist, I know that the consequences for biodiversity will be very bad. So I think we have also to establish links between different conventions, between these tools, as we were discussing the links between clusters, between etc. So I think in terms of governance, maybe scientists could also push for having this governance system evolving and these traditional ways to see things in silo, indeed. That is, okay, I have to fix the climate issue, and I have to tackle the biodiversity challenge, etc. Now, we recognize that it has been said, it's not new. We know it's systemic solutions we need, and we need to modify our way to do in science, in policy making, technical institutes, everything. We need to rethink about. So I think we have to be lucid about the challenge, because it's huge. It means you have to discuss with many actors and try to propose new ways to do things. It's just huge, but it's the only. If we want to change the status concerning the biodiversity crisis, the climate crisis, etc., this is the way to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Also at the European level, I think it's the case.
I agree. I think that thinking that you're promoting is in the institutional governance box. So it's both in the conceptual framework and also in the last slide that I showed in the integrative governance approach. But I totally agree that sometimes climate change mitigation and adaptation solutions are not biodiversity friendly. I have followed biodiversity, international biodiversity negotiations. I'm a political scientist, so I've followed those for years. And you see that the CBD or the biodiversity community is often has to keep the climate change community on board, if you will, in this integrative thinking. I think the biodiversity community, in essence, thinks intersectorally, because biodiversity includes sustainable use. You know, the convention includes also sustainable use and also equitable sharing of the benefits. So it is a very broad integrative convention, if you will. So my experience is that the biodiversity community per se thinks integratively, but other communities not necessarily so.
I think that, I agree with you that perhaps some of the solutions proposed for climate change are not immediately compatible with biodiversity. But I think as the thinking becomes more systemic and as we look more at the land use and the soil component of our ecosystems and our habitats, that actually there's a greater convergence. And I think that thinking is beginning to evolve, and I hope again that this community can help contribute to it. As far as bringing the policies together, you're entirely right, and I'm at least proud to say that our new president-elect did underline that in her political guidance. I don't have the exact words with me, but she talked about the importance of taking biodiversity at the heart of our policy making across various different sectors. I can't quote from memory which sectors she referred to, but they did also refer to trade, and that's something that's very important.
And going back to the European context, I would like to present Xavier Leroux, who's the chairman of the Biodiversa Partnership and the proposer of the future European Partnership on Biodiversity. And to achieve this, even in the new Green Deal and the priorities that we are for the first time setting in Europe with biodiversity in the core, what would be the objectives of this European partnership?
Okay, well, first thing for me, it's to be clear on what we are talking about when we say biodiversity. There is one way to present the SDGs. The boxes, different boxes with numbers, and number, 11, whatever. One is for aquatic biodiversity, and another number is terrestrial biodiversity. Okay, this is good. This gives visibility to the biodiversity challenge, but still I prefer this way to present SDGs. That is the linkages that exist between the different SDGs. Again, we cannot tackle SDGs without taking into account and working on these linkages. And moreover, here, to recognize that the status of the biosphere and biodiversity will clearly determine our ability to reach the other SDGs. How can you propose sustainability, reach sustainability, without first making sure that we will ensure a good status of biodiversity for freshwater, terrestrial, and marine. So this is the way of thinking should be this one. So it's completely linked to the linkages we were talking about, the need to go towards transformative approaches for sustainability. And and maybe it's the second slide to answer this question. In biodiversity, maybe for a EU partnership on biodiversity, for us, you see the impact on outputs we put forward at this stage with 4 pillars. It's very flexible, it's only for debate, etc. But still, to give a flavor, the first one would be to have science-based actions to protect, restore, and sustainably manage our natural capital. So to better use science for actions. For this, we need a strategic vision and strategic agenda across Europe, linking the European level with member states, and to be in a position to develop more systemic research program to understand the drivers, indeed, to understand the impact of these drivers on biodiversity, and also to work on the levels of actions. It's not only to characterize status, we need to propose action, possible actions. Second pillar, it's very consistent with what has been said, which is good. It's to mainstream biodiversity in a range of sectors, and to deploy nature-based solutions, not only to halt the loss of biodiversity, but try, as far as possible, to go towards a net gain of biodiversity. For this, we need science-based methodologies. Methodologies include indicators, etc., and better engagement of a broad range of stakeholders, including businesses, citizens, practitioners, managers, etc. The third pillar, it would be a more effective use of knowledge to design, implement, and evaluate policies. It's really to have a better link between research and innovation and environmental policy making. And for this, we can promote policy-oriented research programs, but then our policy makers will say it will take too much time if we only do this, and they're right. So we need also science-based guidance, evaluation policies that is quite versatile approaches, listening to the needs of policymakers in this domain. And the fourth pillar, it's maybe to go beyond Europe, really to look at the international picture, because biodiversity will not stop at European borders. And here, of course, it's hard to make sure that there is a increased, better contribution of research to IPBES, the future work plan of IPBES, to think about the post-2020 framework, of course. And here, you see, we raise the issue of overseas regions and countries and territories. Why? As European, we cannot miss the fact that there are regions and countries and territories overseas. And in terms of biodiversity, they have specificities, and Europe has a particular responsibility for this. So this is why it's here. And so I think the ambition would be to really develop a more strategic collaboration with IPBES, not only assessment. Assessment, I think it's good, but we have to think about all the functions, knowledge and data, capacity building, etc. This is maybe where we have to reinforce things. Okay, I will stop here.
And how is it going to work? Under which conditions this is going to make a difference for research and for biodiversity and for the people?
Good question. So 3 slides, 1 slide per challenge. For me, the first challenge, if I try to understand why it's not working as good as we would like it to function today. The first thing, very often, you have the research world and the environmental policy world, and not sufficient link between them. So I expect from a European partnership to reinforce this link. For instance, in Biodiversity, we do have research ministries, environmental ministries, but we are well placed to see that it's not as strong as we would like. There is a MICE initiative, for instance, where you would have more the environmental ministries on board, but not too much research. And another example, you have Biodiversity or the framework program for promoting research. And you have great programs like LIFE, for instance, who are promoting actions on the ground with a concrete impact for biodiversity. Maybe we have to think about the ways to try to promote collaboration between these different actors. And of course, so I focus on research and policy, environmental policymakers. But we have to do this with a broad range of stakeholders. We have many actors that exist. I see guys from OPLA. We have people from Eclipse, from many initiatives like this. We have to really exploit the skills, the capacities of these initiatives. They can offer a lot, I think, in this context. And maybe some of them could be third parties also for doing some key functions. Second point, it's to reinforce the integration between different levels, that is the local and national authorities, European ones, and international. And so a lot is done already, but we still need to promote this. So for me, again, a European partnership, it's a very good tool for this, because by definition, European partnerships, they are here to make the link between the European level and the national and local level. So it's a perfect tool to do this. And it's also, I think it's expected, this kind of tool to be open to the international level, so that's fine. And the last challenge is to be clear that for some, they may see these kind of partnerships mostly to promote research and innovation program. It's much more than this. I will not comment on the slide. You have, it's not exhaustive. You have a range of functions to be covered, but to be covered, again, not in silo. That is how to make sure that the research innovation program will help policy support, will promote stakeholder engagement, how to make sure that capacity building is developed so that we better support policy, and we, at the end, it's my conclusion, we finally modify the way we do research and maybe the way we implement and design policies.
We have very limited time. We should be closing now, but I want to reopen the floor for the public. One question, and we show the Slido. You can answer the question on the partnership as well, whilst...
First of all, I want to say thank you very much. I found this session very stimulating, so thank you. Just a quick comment in relation to the role of science in informing policy in this space. I was at a session earlier on, and there seems to be very much a dependence on STEM science to inform policy making, and I think the work that Ingrid presented and her own background is very much testament to the very valuable contribution social science can make to informing policy making. I just have a question though. Here we're talking about linking research with policy. And if we think about it, really, we have to fundamentally make a business case to industry if we want to change the underlying drivers. So I just wonder if any of the panellists would have a commentary to make in terms of the business case that we can make to industry to underline the importance of biodiversity and thus contribute to changing the underlying drivers.
Maybe on the four pillars I have presented, if you remember, the second one was quite heavily focused on the link and the mainstreaming of biodiversity, in particular into private sectors. So for us, it's key. We have to work, for instance, with biodiversity and business platforms that exist at the European level, and with key private actors. So they have fully their place to work in this kind of partnership, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, there is a business case for biodiversity-friendly economic activities. Nature-based solutions is an example of that. We'll talk. I think there's a panel on that later this afternoon. But there's lots of companies out there trying to work on a circular economy. So there's also a lot of activity in the economic sector trying to contribute to the transformation to a more sustainable economy. That's my short-term answer. My long-term answer is the business case, or our definition of business case, is going to hopefully also change. So that if environmental impacts are integrated in our economic system and are incorporated into our prices, then the business case will become easier and will become mainstream. In the short term, we need to promote the current business case, but in the long term, we need to work on changing how the business case is made.
Yeah, and I think this comes back to the person who said that we shouldn't just be looking at STEM science, that here there can be research done in economics, there can be research done in business schools. Some of the things that we're trying to get answers to at the moment is the value of natural capital. How do we value it? How do we do natural capital accounting? These are things that we have to get the scientific, maybe it's not STEM science, but it's economic science, societal science, get the answers so that we can build it into the way that the capital system works and to build it into the economic decision making. So there's a role for the science to contribute to it to make these changes happen.
And behavior and psychology.
Indeed.
And a lot of other things. I can see some of the words that have been said about the key impacts and success indicators of a possible European partnership, opportunity, business, biodiversity. That's the key word today. We have to finalize, but the last question is an open text one. It will remain open. I hope you can give your. What else would you include in Horizon Europe strategic program to tackle biodiversity loss and to restore ecosystem services? On this slide, I leave the last words to Anne.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I've been asked to just say some final words. Obviously, it's hard to sum up, and the real answer will only come after you've all given your increased and additional contributions to the consultation. But some of the things I took note of, Ingrid said to us, EP Best said we're doing something significantly wrong. And John asked the question, how can RTD accelerate the solutions? I think from the discussion here, it's very clear that research and innovation has a role, but it has to be coordinated research and innovation cutting across the different disciplines and looking at all the different factors, looking at the indirect drivers, looking at things that perhaps have been politically difficult to touch, things like spatial planning, and trying to come up with the solutions and not forgetting that we need to design solutions which are also equitable and societally possible. So I think we've had a very good discussion. I would encourage you all to keep thinking about it, see how we can improve the program, not only Cluster 6, but looking through the rest of the program. Start thinking ahead about how you can contribute yourselves through your research projects in the future, and also, at the same time, if you have policy suggestions, DG Environment is always open to receiving inputs, because we have a huge challenge ahead of us and we need the scientific input yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. And if you feel like, read the orientations, answer to the consultation, tweet #BiodiversityEU, and we might take your suggestions on board.